Here's what's coming up on the world today. Brazil's daily death toll jumps to over 4,000 in a single day. Concern rises over vaccine production in India. Plus, former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo is given the green light to return to the country. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia in Lagos. We began in Brazil, where the COVID situation appears to be getting worse. The country recorded more than 4,000 COVID-related deaths in 24 hours for the first time. And President Jair Bolsonaro continues to oppose any lockdown measures to curb the outbreak.
Related deaths are on the rise in Brazil, and with more than 4,000 deaths in 24 hours, the country's death toll is now almost 337,000, second only to the United States. In many states in the country, patients with COVID-19 are occupying more than 90% of intensive care unit beds. Several states have reported short supplies of oxygen and sedatives, but despite the critical situation, some cities and states are already easing measures limiting movement of people. President Jair Bolsonaro is in no support of lockdown measures. He argues that the damage to the economy would be worse than the effects of the virus itself, and has tried to reverse some of the restrictions imposed by local authorities in the courts. He has criticized quarantine measures and suggested without evidence that they were linked to obesity and depression. He has not commented on the over 4,000 deaths recorded in the past 24 hours. With more than 13 million COVID-19 infections, the Health Ministry says Brazil is now a threat to the entire effort of the international community to control the pandemic, and that if Brazil is not under control, then the planet is not going to be safe, because new variants are being discovered every week and they're going to cross borders. The health minister says Brazil has detected 92 variants of coronavirus in the country, including the P1 variant or the Brazil variant, which has become a cause for concern because it is thought to be much more contagious. It is thought to have emerged in Amazonas state in November 2020, spreading quickly in the state capital Manaus, where it accounted for 73% of cases by January 2021, according to figures analyzed by researchers in Brazil.
The VOA's Edgar Maciel joins us now from Sao Paulo. Edgar, thanks for joining us on the program.
Hi guys, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. So, do we know what part of the country most of the recent deaths were reported from?
Yeah, we had more than 4,000 deaths yesterday here in Brazil. It's a new record in 24 hours. Imagine that 25% of all deaths are here, happening here in São Paulo state, the most populous in Brazil, with the largest cities in all America, where more than 15 million people are living right now. Here, the local government are trying to do a lockdown to try to contain the disease, but the numbers are still growing. That's because many variants of COVID-19 are circulating around the city at the same time. So these new strains are much more stronger and spread more quickly here in Brazil. So it's a fight against time to try to contain the worst.
And has the president said anything yet about the situation in Brazil?
Yeah. One day after we registered more than 4,000 deaths, President Jair Bolsonaro again criticized the distance measures to try to reduce the number of cases. And he also said there will not be a national lockdown right now here in Brazil. So there really isn't one. Walking on the streets here in São Paulo, where I live, it's like we're normal, as if there were no pandemic. So we see crowded subways, clandestine parties, commerce open, a lot of people without masks in the streets. And this is a scenario that makes things worse day by day. And meanwhile, hospitals continue to collapse in most Brazilian states. I talked to several doctors in the last few weeks, and the teams are exhausted. They no longer know how to treat so many serious cases at the same time. People are dying in the line for one ICU vacancy without any treatment. It's a completely collapsed system.
Well, we do understand that some states are already calling off restrictions, and this does contrast with the rising number of cases and deaths, which leaves one wondering, are the leaders even paying attention to what's actually going on?
For real, I never seen this country like this way, for sure. It's the worst moment for Brazil in its history, for sure. There is no synergy between governors and President Jair Bolsonaro. It is as if each one is pulling the rope to one side while the Brazilian people are dying every day. And you feel fear in each moment that you need to go outside because you don't know if you get infected or not. Governors, of course, are trying as they can to close cities, but the federal government does not help, does not support these measures. And meanwhile, vaccination here remains very slow in Brazil. 22 million Brazilians have already been vaccinated. If you see the total number, it's good. It's a good number, but it represents almost 10% of our population here in Brazil. So, in other words, the disease continues to spread, and experts that I had talked already decreed that April, the month of April, is going to be even worse than we ever see right now. Brazil is sure to reach more than 500,000 deaths in the next months of year.
Wow. Well, we do hope that the situation does improve in Brazil. And Edgar, thanks for joining us. Do stay safe out there.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The UK's drug regulator, the MHRA, says people under 30 will be offered an alternative COVID jab to the AstraZeneca vaccine due to evidence linking it to rare blood clots. This comes after a review that found that by the end of March, 79 people in the UK had suffered rare blood clots after vaccination, 19 of whom had died. The regulator says although this is not proof that the jab caused the clots, the link was getting firmer. Here's more in our global update.
All 79 cases, according to the MHRA, occurred after the first dose. 19 of them died. Of the cases, 51 were women and 28 men, aged 18 to 79 years old. And the risk of this kind of side effect is about 4 in 1 million to those who receive the vaccine.
Well, I haven't.
The regulator, however, says the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine outweigh any risks.
It's very clear from everything I've seen and read that the risk of this thrombotic complication, the blood clotting, if it is in fact cause and effect linked to the vaccine, is very, very much lower than the risks associated with coronavirus infection itself. And we must bear in mind too that COVID-19 infection does carry with it a very considerable increased risk of clotting events.
Meanwhile, the EU drug regulator, the European Medicines Agency, says it has found a link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots.
The Prague, after a very in-depth analysis, has concluded that the reported cases of unusual blood clotting following vaccination with the AstraZeneca vaccine should be listed as possible side effects of the vaccine.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel supports demands for a short, tough lockdown in the country to curb the spread of the coronavirus as infection rates are too high. The country is struggling to tackle a third wave of the pandemic, and several regional leaders have called for a short, sharp lockdown while the country tries to vaccinate more people. Over in France, the Stade de France, the national stadium, which once hosted football's World Cup final, has been turned into a vaccination center. The stadium aims to give 10,000 jabs each week and is open Monday to Saturday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Health workers in Peru are protesting labor conditions as they battle to cope with the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The doctors and nurses are demanding medical supplies, more beds in intensive care units, and vaccinations, as well as better working conditions and pay. Finally, a 104-year-old woman from northern Colombia has recovered from coronavirus for the second time. Carmen Hernandez received an ovation from hospital staff as she was discharged after spending 21 days in the hospital fighting the infectious disease.
The head of India's Serum Institute says its production capacity is very overstretched, referring to vaccine production, which has experienced a drop. The SII had been supplying vaccines around the world, including to the COVAX scheme for middle and low-income countries. But India has put a temporary halt on these exports. As of April 7th, around 85 million doses had been administered nationally, and the program was recently extended to include all those aged 45 and above. The government says vaccination will not yet be extended to wider groups because of a limited supply until July. Right now, the growing number of infections remains very worrying.
This is really alarming, this way it is spreading. In fact, you just imagine what was there a month back and what is the situation now. There is a dramatic surge, and what I presume is that this surge is going to intensify in the coming weeks or a months even.
We're hearing more on the use of deadly force by former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on George Floyd, leading to his death in May last year. A while ago, Los Angeles Police Sergeant Jody Steger, a use of force expert, testified on day 8 of the trial that Chauvin caused deadly force when he kneeled on Floyd's neck for a restraint of 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Asked why this constituted deadly force, Steger said, quote, because he was in the prone position. He was not resisting, he was handcuffed. He was not attempting to evade. He was not attempting to resist. And the pressure that was being caused by the body weight could cause positional asphyxia, which could cause death. And that no force should have been used on Floyd when he was handcuffed and prone on the ground. Meanwhile, Maurice Hall, who was in the car with Floyd when the police confronted them last May, appeared in front of the judge via Zoom on Tuesday to discuss his intention to plead the Fifth if he is called to testify. Both the prosecution and the defense have called Hall as a witness in the trial. Hall's attorney, Adrian Cousins, argued that he planned to use the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and she asked Judge Peter Cahill to quash his subpoena to testify. Cousins said he was concerned Hall's testimony could be used in a drug or third-degree murder charge against him. Well, let's talk to our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, Akate.
So tell us, why is it so important to establish the use of force in this case?
Use of force is really at this time going to be both the prosecution and defense. The prosecution is going to want to move forward and state that the use of force was beyond what training allowed for and how he was trained, and that the use of force was obviously excessive. But then on the defense's side, they're going to use the use of force as a way to say, listen, this is part of what they're trained to do, police officers, when they have a suspect that they believe they cannot control, or that they believe that potentially could cause harm to them. And so they're going to say that there is some leeway into the way in which an officer uses their force, and the way in which they're able to ensure the detainment and attainment of a potential suspect.
Well, the man in the vehicle with Floyd at the time, Maurice Hall, wants to plead the Fifth. How could that have an impact on the trial?
That will have an impact on the trial in some way, just because I think that, but it'll be really more devastating for the defense team, because they're going to really focus in on this substance abuse issue and whether or not he was under the influence. And I think that is what they're going to try to use for the individual, for the man that was with him in the car. But he is saying he is pleading the Fifth because he is not being given any type of protection if he does sit on the witness stand, because obviously he was the closest person to George Floyd on that day and during those moments. And so his information could obviously lead to a host of other questions, which could potentially put his life at risk when he leaves the courtroom. And so due to that, he is not sitting on the stand. I think the prosecution understands that. I'm sure the George Floyd family understands that. And at this time, I think that it will, in some ways, impact the case, but it will definitely not take away from some of the core issues of second and third degree murder charges.
Right. Well, Maria, thanks for giving us clarity on the situation there. We will be keeping a close eye on it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come on The World Today. Lovers of luxurious fashion can still have access to goods despite the lockdown. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. 2 doormen have been fired after they allegedly failed to intervene as an Asian American woman was being attacked in New York. The 65-year-old woman was admitted to the hospital after she was punched and kicked repeatedly last month. CCTV video from the attack appeared to show staff at the Manhattan building watching without intervening. The Brodsky organization, owners of the building, said the men assisted the woman after the attacker left. The incident comes amid a rise in anti-Asian crimes in the wake of the pandemic, including a deadly attack in Atlanta in which 3 women of Asian descent were among the 8 dead. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara says former President Laurent Gbagbo and his right-hand man Charles Blé Goudé are free to return to the country after they were definitively acquitted of crimes against humanity. President Ouattara was speaking a week after the International Criminal Court upheld Mr. Gbagbo's acquittal in a case that focused on post-election violence a decade ago. More than 3,000 people were killed in the brief civil war that followed the disputed 2010 vote. Mr. Gbagbo refused to step down despite losing. He is allowed the advantages and allowances available to all former leaders in the Ivory Coast. The tragedy in Kenya, where at least 15 people have died in a road accident along the Mombasa-Malindi Road in the coastal region. About 20 others were injured following the early morning head-on collision involving 2 passenger buses. Both drivers died on the spot. A video has been shared of a mangled wreckage of the 2 vehicles and civilians helping load the injured and dead onto rescue vehicles. Eyewitnesses say the road section where the accident occurred has been under construction. Amnesty International says Russian critic Alexei Navalny is being incarcerated in conditions which may amount to torture and may be slowly killing him. Amnesty International said Navalny, who last year was poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent, was now being subjected to sleep deprivation and did not have access to a doctor he could trust. Navalny announced hunger strike last week in protest at what he says was the refusal of prison authorities to treat him properly for acute back and leg pain. The Kremlin declined to comment on Navalny's health, but said he would receive medical care like any other prisoner if ill.
He is being placed under conditions of detentions which, according to Amnesty International, may amount to torture. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. The fact that he is woken up every 1 or 2 hours is a form of torture. The fact that he cannot have access to a doctor he can trust is a form of ill treatment, inhuman and possibly degrading. All of those in combination point to the fact that, in my view, the Russian authorities may be placing him into a situation of a slow death and may be seeking to hide what is being done to him. Clearly, the Russian authorities are violating his rights. We have to do more. We have to put the pressure. The the authorities have already attempted to kill him. They have poisoned him with Novichok. They are now detaining him and imposing prison conditions amounting to torture.
Taiwan says it will fight to the end if China attacks, and that the United States sees a danger that this could happen amid mounting Chinese military pressure, including aircraft carrier drills near the island. Chinese claim Taiwan has complained of repeated military activities by Beijing in recent months, with China's Air Force making almost daily forays in Taiwan's air defense identification zone. On Monday, April 5th, China said an aircraft carrier group was exercising close to the island.
And I would like to also stress again that the defense of Taiwan is our own responsibility. If we are not willing to defend ourselves, we do not have the right to ask other countries to sacrifice for Taiwan. And therefore, we take our own defense in a very serious manner. Our defense ministry is very determined in defending ourselves. We are willing to defend ourselves, and it's without any question. And we will fight the war if we need to fight the war, and if we need to, to defend ourselves to the very last day, we will defend ourselves to the very last day. It's been getting strong.
Paris is known as the fashion capital of the world, but the pandemic and the resultant lockdowns have certainly dampened spirits. Fashion houses are, however, exploring avenues to keep the fashion flame alive.
In Art Curial Auction House, overlooking the shuttered boutiques of the Champs-Élysées Avenue in Paris, vintage fashion expert Clara Vivienne is overseeing the sale of hundreds of Chanel jackets, shoes and jeweled accessories, all online. Paris may be the world's fashion capital, but a third COVID-19 lockdown is once again sending lovers of luxury who have time to spare and money to spend on their screens in search of a next vintage Chanel dress or Hermès bag. Vintage was already enjoying a revival, according to Vivienne, driven by a growing discomfort with fast fashion among consumers and increasing environmental awareness. But the pandemic shifted more of it online. She says handbags sell particularly well. In her words, if we bought a classic black Chanel handbag in jersey material 20 years ago, we're sure that in 20 years it will still be in fashion and it will remain desirable.
Il nous reste 2 jours et 3 heures et on en est à 1900 €.
Fashion and online vintage clothing sales more than quadrupled at online auctions in France in 2020, compared with the pre-pandemic levels of 6.2 million euros, according to the online auction house aggregateur Interenchères. Collector Olivier Chatenon, a flamboyant 60-year-old stylist, spent his young adult life scouring the French capital's flea markets and auction houses in the Dreux neighborhood with his father.
Voilà, je suis content. Il est mélangé avec Mugler, c'est pas grave.
His private collection is a treasure trove of Ungaro dresses, Chloé blouses and Sonia Riquiel overcoats. Several years ago, he sold his entire Yves Saint Laurent collection, all 4,000 items. He said the growth in vintage sales is also due to more liberal fashion attitudes, wherein one can dress in second-hand clothes from head to toe without looking like someone coming from another era.
Well, that is all we have for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.